Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm Bruce McCurdy with the Edmonton Journal's Cult of Hockey, and I'm here today with my Cult of Hockey colleague, Kurt Leavins. Hello, Kurt.
Hello, Bruce. How are you this fine Sunday afternoon when we're recording this?
Now that we're finally recording this on Sunday, almost dinner time, and I'm a little flummoxed because I had a funky little error here that we just fixed, a technical error that was sitting in the chair behind the keyboard. If you know what I mean.
I have those issues all the time.
Anyways, we are here on Sunday after a big spree of Edmonton Oilers cuts today, and we thought we'd try and do a weekly podcast. David will be back here in the next few days, David Staples. And of course, the games will start counting for real soon enough, and we'll be doing a podcast after each one. But right now, we have a few games that have gone by since the last time Kurt and I spoke, and the Oilers are up to 3 wins, 2 losses, and their training camp roster is down to 30 healthy bodies. So there was a whole spree of essentially 9 cuts today, although sort of spread over 2 or 3 days by the time you count the waivers of Seth Griffith, who got waived yesterday and cleared today, and of Greg McKegg, who got waived today and probably will clear tomorrow. What do you think the chances Greg McKegg gets claimed?
Yeah, I don't think he will, even though he's, got a little bit of an NHL resume. He kind of stacked up as a 6C here, and it's a lot of organizations. I think if they're looking to fill a 4C position, they might be doing it with one of their own guys. So I have a feeling he'll be in Bakersfield, but I mean, you never know with these things, right? So,
once in a long while, somebody out there goes, "Hey, I remember that guy. I thought he was pretty good. I bet you we could get something out of him."
Yeah.
But for the most part, he's, Riley Sheehan version 17.0, and everybody has their own version or a reasonable facsimile of. And Kurt, as a player, maybe you have a different perspective, but to me, a team doesn't really want to claim a guy on waivers because of what that says to their own team. It kind of sends a message of this guy that's not good enough to play in Edmonton. Well, we still think he's better than some of you guys.
Yeah.
And you want to have a real solid reason to go for that guy, because normally you've got a peg in every hole, and I mean, maybe you can make it a little bit better, but usually you wind up with a second peg for the same hole, and that doesn't necessarily solve your issue either.
Anyway, and typically, if you claim a guy on waivers, you're really incentivized to keep him on your NHL roster. And a guy like McKegg, and I don't mean any disrespect, he really is an AHL guy who's useful as a call-up, and so I don't know if a lot of teams would claim him and use him as one of their 23 men. So,
yeah, he had something like 233 NHL games. I think I may have misidentified last podcast for him, and I was thinking of a different player, and I said 82, I believe. But he had he played with 7 Eastern Conference teams. He's never played a game for a Western Conference team. It's 7 teams, and he's played NHL games in each of the last 9 seasons. But AHL games in 8 of those 9 seasons. So, I mean, He is an absolute tweener.
For sure. And he played 40-some for the Rangers last year, did he not?
Yeah, he got more than an average season for him. So, anyways, he is on the waiver wire today. And did he impress you? He had a couple games in the preseason, and
yeah, to be honest, I thought he was fine, but I didn't think he was better than Derek Ryan or Devin Shore or Brad Malone.
Yeah, no, me either.
At the end of the day.
Right. And I looked at his stats, and he had 2 goals and 3 assists last year.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he's there as a fourth liner to kill clock. It's just sort of the general rule for those guys. And those are Colin Fraser type numbers, right?
Yeah. And I don't mind guys like that in the organization, especially for a team like the Oilers. You can never have too many centers in the pipeline, right?
Right.
You never know in game 65 where you need a guy like that. But I think that's probably the role he fills for the Oilers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, last year, for instance, Cooper Marody and Seth Griffith, who got waived yesterday, they each got called up for one game.
Yeah.
When the team had a bout of COVID and they were down a few bodies and they were dressing a shorthanded emergency roster in Seattle, those guys came up and played about 8 minutes each and helped them win.
Yeah,
So
and for a guy like McCaig, who's is arguably a real NHL player, that's not a bad guy to be able to plug in there if you're stuck,
right,
right? But I think
yeah,
he's of the stuck variety.
yeah, I think so too. And he's behind all the guys that you named, and he also might be behind Dylan Holloway. Who knows after the way he finished last night's game playing pivot.
Yeah, I feel like Holloway is tracking to make this team, and we can probably talk about that more in a second. But I'm starting to shuffle around the roster and determine where Holloway will fit in as opposed to not fit in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's right. I'm just sort of adding his name as a sort of surprise addition to the centers part of
Yes.
the roster. I listed 8 experienced centers in a post I did the other day, calling it the strength of the organization, probably the best center core in the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
8 deep and experienced centers, of which Ryan McLeod was the only guy with less than 200 games.
Yeah.
And that was so. I mentioned Dylan Holloway and other guys like Borgo and Hamblin and so on that could
Mm-hmm.
play center, but they probably wouldn't be called to within this team because they're so far down on the totem pole.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I
You
guess,
cited McLeod's experience, yet he may be this team's third best center.
well, that'd be something.
Right.
That'd be something. Wow. So we're going to talk about the top battles remaining in training camp. Uh, and we're going to have a little look at the PTOs, a little bit look at how the roster might be made up when the time comes, and it's coming fast. Just a little over a week away that they have to declare the season opening roster, and maybe just a little bit about the Winnipeg Jets game, the most recent game that they played last night. And maybe, Kurt, if you don't mind, we can start right there. You had some observations of that game, I'm sure.
Yeah. You know what? The Oilers were again outmanned, although maybe not as severely as they were against the Flames the other night. But still, Winnipeg on paper had the better team and was the better team on the ice for the first 9-10 minutes of the game. But I thought Stuart Skinner gave them a puncher's chance and held them in there. And once the Oilers found their feet, keeping in mind they flew in day of to play that game, I thought they dug in and gave the Jets everything they could handle plus some. And I ended up being really pleased with the effort. Number one that I saw. I was really fascinated with some of the lineup decisions that Manson and Woodcroft made in game. I thought they were really actively trying to see,
Yes.
wonder how this guy does in this situation. So I found that fascinating. And at the end of the day, of course, they won, which is, even if it's a no points exhibition game, you always like to win. And so I came out of that one feeling like those were 2 points in quotes that I kind of really didn't expect at the start of the night, but was pretty happy to have them at the end of the night.
Yeah, well, always nice to beat the Jets and to do so on Dale Hawerchuk night. I mean, I guess it probably sucks a little bit if you're a Jets fan. On the other hand, Oilers beating the Jets with was the game that Dale Hawerchuk knew. More's the pity from his perspective because he was a great player, but he was a minority of great players on the ice, and any game he played against Edmonton was his problem. Anyways, it was nice to get that. I agree with you 100% about the fun watching the coaching. In fact, I wrote a whole paragraph about that in my post game of how they managed the 6 defensemen, how they switched up with forwards, and they had guys switching position. I never saw Devon Shore playing right wing before, but there he was in the 60th minute of a tie game, where, I mean, obviously there's no points at stake, but you're establishing what you want to do in the regular season, which is not make mistakes in the 60th minute of a tie game. Not only did they not make any mistakes, he and Luke Esposito and James Hamblin of all, was the line. that kept the puck down below the hash marks in Winnipeg's territory for about 45 seconds. It was great. That may have been my favorite shift of the entire game by the Oilers, and just within its context, I just thought they they showed the whole rest of the team, this is how it's done in
Yeah.
that situation. And so,
You
but of
made a point
course,
to me before we got going
mhm,
tonight that it was
mhm,
your observation, which I thought was bang on, which was it looked like every player there for the Oilers that night wanted to be there. It's
mhm.
like they weren't just going because, well, I need to be man number 20. It's all of them looked like they had something to prove.
Going to Winnipeg. It's one of the least favorite games of the entire schedule for the veteran pros, as I understand it. I heard Jason Strudwick give a fantastic story about having to go to Winnipeg because Laddie Smead came down with some kind of ailment in the morning skate, flying all the way there, and then wind up not playing because Smead decided he was okay to play at game time. And Struddy had some choice words, not those kind of words. He was on live radio, but he had some choice words just for the, what a grind. They come up, they have a morning skate here. They get suited up, in suits. They go on a plane ride to Winnipeg. They come down, pregame skate, game, and then back into suits and back home before the end of the day. I mean, that is a business trip, but that's a long day.
Yep.
And there's no overnights. There are all these preseason games. They played, 4 games in, the 3 Western Canadian cities and Seattle, and that's going to be standard fare for preseason for the foreseeable. And each one, as I understand it, was a day trip there and back again.
Yep. Yep, for sure.
Little
And
wagons.
so you're already down a court and you're fighting for your livelihood at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. It's
Yeah.
it's a difficult situation, but I guess in a lot of ways it also mirrors the
Mm-hmm.
desperation that the coaching staff is looking for from these types of players and the way they want them to perform when they're thrust into those situations.
Right. Well, you know that, a veteran pro, and then pick any of the guys from the top 6 or the top 4 defensemen or guys who didn't go last night. For them that have basically got the team made already, what's there to prove by going to Winnipeg? Whereas for these guys on the cusp of the roster, which was basically everybody in the
Mm-hmm.
game last night, uh, with possible exception of Stuart Skinner, who I think is pretty safe.
Yeah, and
Uh,
Puljujarvi probably.
but yeah,
Yeah,
there was lots of motivation for every player on the ice, and I thought they pulled together, and I like that they pulled together as a team. It wasn't just every man for himself fighting for a job, but I just thought they clicked nicely together, and for those guys, that long day trip to Winnipeg is an opportunity, and it's opportunity that they're here for. So
100%.
for them, it's always an interesting game. I actually really enjoyed that game. I had way more to say about it than the blowout in the season opener here against the Jets.
Oh, for sure. And Tyler Benson, this is a point again that you made to me. There's a guy who will be damn glad he made that trip
Yeah.
because it'll either give him a much better chance of catching on here, or if he has to pass through waivers, hoping that a scout saw him along the line and he gets a chance somewhere else. I mean, I'd sooner he get his chance with us, but at this
Right.
point, Benson's been a good soldier. I'd like to see him get an even chance anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, well, Winnipeg would have had their eyes open by that if no other team, because he
I
was
think
getting under
so.
their skin the whole game, making good passes and plays too. Scored a goal, made a
Yep.
couple, I thought, beautiful passes.
That's the
And
interesting thing about Benson, right?
mhm,
He's got skill that when
mhm,
the situation presents itself, he can step up.
yeah. And the one play he made that I really liked, such a subtle thing. There was a puck coming along the boards and the high on the defensive zone, about 5 feet inside the blue line. And what he did was he hustled to the boards to protect the puck, and then he actually let the puck go through, took the hit, but because the other guy couldn't get at the puck, and the puck went out into the neutral zone, and the next teammate was on it, and before you knew it, some Winnipeg guy had hauled him down, and Oilers were going on the power play.
Yeah.
And it was just in part because Tyler Benson made a smart play and paid a physical price to get the puck moving in the right direction. Just I love those little subtle plays, and
Yep.
some guys do naturally, and some guys just don't.
Yeah, it's hockey sense, right?
Yeah.
you can see that with him. He's a smart player.
All right. Well, Stuart Skinner, and we talked about. Well, let's talk about 55 now.
Dylan Holloway.
My mind is going. Dylan Holloway, the other game
Yeah.
star from last night for my headline that obviously I haven't got on my screen. Dylan Holloway, along with Stuart Skinner and Tyler Benson, and Holloway to me was the best skater on the ice for the Oilers,
Yep.
at least.
I thought so too. And as I said off the top, I'm starting to go through scenarios now where this guy won't just be on the roster for cap reasons, but because he's one of their best 12 forwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could argue that he's been one of their best 9 forwards so far in training camp. And I know I wrote in my 9 Things column this morning that, I think the time has come to get a larger sample of him with actual top 9 players. Because Ken Holland's point, I think, is smart. If he's just going to be here as a 4th liner, maybe he is better off in Bakersfield, even though he's playing really well. Well, the only way you're going to know if he's a top 9 player is if you put him with top 9 players. So I think in 2 of the 3 next games, I think we need to see him with, not necessarily with Connor McDavid. I think that line's set up, but with a Draisaitl or a Nugent Hopkins, it seems to me that's the next logical step. Maybe I'm missing something and God knows Jay Woodcroft is smarter than me, but it looks like that's the next logical step to take in determining whether this guy can make the cut or not.
Yeah, well, they've tried him now at 2 different positions. They've given him plenty of ice time on both special teams. Yep. He's looked quite at home on the penalty kill, and he's been dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been, last night he got a shorthanded breakaway and hit the post.
Yeah, and the separation he created on that play, right? It like 3 steps, and the next closest defender was a mile behind him. Like, he can really fly. Maybe not quite Ryan McLeod wheels, but in the same postal code, right? He can really motor. Right. And when I look at that left side, it's difficult to say that Dylan Holloway hasn't outplayed Matthias Janmark, who I think has been solid but unspectacular. Mm-hmm. And while you don't expect him to beat out Kane or Hyman, there's always that possibility. Well, if Hyman moves over to the right-hand side, all of a sudden there is a prime time opening for Hollywood. So right. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned him not playing with top 9. I mean, he hasn't had any chance at all. I mean, there's 5 guys, forwards, the $5 million guys, right? McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Nuge, and Kane, that have only played 1 game. And guess who didn't play that game? Dylan Holloway. So he's had literally 0 chance to, even share a bench with any of those guys. Just that. Well, that's about to change. I would suggest that tomorrow, Monday night, the Oilers will have many of the big guys back out there, and I suspect this time Holloway will be part of that mix, and they'll start just seeing, like they did last night. The coaches did give different opportunities for different players with different line mates, but there was really not very much chance for Holloway to play with skill, other than they did put him with Puljujärvi in, especially in overtime. They got a couple of shifts. Puljujärvi, I would suggest, was by some distance the of the established players that played Agreed. In that game. That he's, he's the one that was a top 6er last year. Let's put it that way.
Yep. And I think Holloway's most common line mate through this main camp here has been Brad Malone. And look, Brad Malone is a good pro, and I got lots of time for Brad Malone. But if you're playing with Brad, you're not playing top 9 minutes, right?
Right. No, that's almost the definition of the 4th line.
Yes.
So, but the fact that he went from that to centering a line, and where Brad Malone, I didn't think played a whole lot in the 3rd period, says to me that he was, getting the push as the game came down the stretch.
Well, and I think if you're going to have a 21 or 22 man roster, you have to have players in your bottom 6 who can do more than one thing.
Mhm.
You know, can they play a couple of positions, and can they be on at least one of your special teams? Which is where I think a guy like Derek Ryan has got a chance to hold his spot, because he can play wing, he can play center, he can kill penalties, he can take faceoffs right-handed. He ticks a lot of boxes.
Yep.
And in watching Holloway, the way the coaches deployed him last night, I could see him in a number of scenarios where he can help an NHL team today, right?
Right. Yeah, all that versatility. I mean, two special teams, and he played just a ton of minutes. Last night, Holloway played 4 minutes and 2 seconds on the power play, and 3:42 team high, 3:42 on the penalty kill.
Yeah.
And he played 21:40 in the game. Most of the team. I mean, the coaches are really pouring him out there,
Mm-hmm.
and he was excelling. And he played two positions, and he played 3-on-3 overtime.
Yeah.
You know, like he did a lot of things.
And doesn't look the slightest bit overmatched physically either, which you would understand for a player of his age and maturity. But he
Yes,
can handle himself just fine out there when the
seems like
going
it.
gets rugged, right?
Seems like it. Now we talked about briefly, at least you mentioned in passing something about the salary cap reasons for keeping Dylan Holloway on the roster. Those being that uh, if he is on the season opening roster, just his salary counts against his cap, and his bonuses, which he's on in line for $850,000 in potential bonuses. They go into a pool that get paid at the end of the year and come out of next year's cap. If he's sent to the minors before the season starts and they call him up at any point during the season, he gets the cap that's his salary plus the maximum amount of all those bonuses.
Mm.
And all of a sudden he goes from, 863,000 to basically double that
It's
when he
basically
gets
another player, right?
called up. So
Another
the
player's
idea
salary at
being all
least.
along that they would take Dylan Holloway, keep him on the roster to start the season, and then maybe for day one, if he's on the roster, he's good for that bonus for the whole rest of the season. Day two, you have the option, you can send him down, bring someone else back up. But the point you were making, which I agree with, is that he's making the case strongly that day two, he stays here.
Yeah.
So now by refraction, there's a similar situation that sets up on the blue line with Philip Broberg, who's 800. He's got a $500,000 potential bonus, and sort of the same thing applies. You want to get him on that opening roster, and you kind of imprint that bonus into your cap structure. You don't have to worry about it till next year, and so the idea was that he's probably going to make the team as the number 6 defenseman and maybe more if he really impressed during camp. But in his case, the option is very realistic that he could be uh, kept on the season opening roster. But if the coaching staff has deemed that another player, and I'm thinking Markus Niremelainen, has beat him out for that job, well, they can freely send Niremelainen down to the minors to start the season. And on day two, they can flip them and bring in Niremelainen to play the game. In the meantime, they've looked after Broberg's bonuses for, I won't say if, I'll say when he gets called up later in the season. You
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be worrying about any stupid bonus that's messing up with your razor thin salary cap situation.
For sure.
So in that case, I think it's possible. What do you think of the relative merits of Niremelainen versus Broberg in terms of how they played in the games we've seen?
Yeah, well, as I've watched it, I'm of the opinion today, and there's a few more exhibition games left to go. To date, I think Niremelainen has outplayed him
Mm-hmm.
for that third left defense position. And if push came to shove, Niremelainen would be the guy that I would be playing NHL games. I can't help but watch Philip Broberg and think, I think he might still need a little bit more time in the AHL. We've all heard the story about how he put on, a whole bunch of extra muscle in the offseason. He doesn't look like he's quite grown into his new body yet.
Mm-hmm.
And look, there is no crime in that. These
Right.
are young developing adults, right? Maybe he
It
just
happened
needs it.
before.
Yeah, maybe he just needs a few more reps to kind of smooth things out. That's okay. I don't think anyone is going to call him well, somebody probably will, but there's always going to be somebody. I don't think anybody will say he's crashed and burned just because he needs, an extra couple of months with the Condors. So if I were to pick today, I think Niemelainen's been the better of the two defensemen. And what I'll say about Niemelainen is he brings an aspect that no other blue liner except for Darnell Nurse brings. And I would argue Niemelainen even brings it in a more punctuated way than Nurse does with his physicality, the way he closes on attackers and punishes them. Quite frankly, you can usually count on 5 or 6 times a day that someone's getting pancaked into the boards. And having played the game a little bit, it's not that hit that has the big impact. It's everybody else seeing it, and the next time they're on the ice, they're looking around wondering if they're in his sights next.
Yeah,
I think it keeps another team honest, and I think that amount of physicality is a real plus. And Niemelainen's skating continues to improve. He was never a bad skater, but I think this is the best I've seen him. As I say, with a few exhibition games to go, it's still a tight battle, I think. And I think that Ryan Murray is locked and loaded to be the 7D on this club, and I think that's fine. But right now, I think it's Niemelainen by a nose.
Yeah, it's an interesting battle. I was happy that Broberg went to Penticton, but I wasn't that thrilled with how he actually played there.
I know you were.
Honest.
Yeah.
And then last night, frankly, I was encouraged by his game, and I thought in the first period I thought he wasn't good at all, but I thought he really turned it up. And in the third period, he looked, with all that power play time they had, I thought he looked quite comfortable during that.
Yeah.
And on the 3-on-3, when there was skating room out there, he was starting to feel it a little bit. And maybe that's just the tip of the iceberg, and let's hope so. Niemelainen, he's played 4 of the 5 exhibition games so far. Sorry, preseason games, TM. And so there's been, so far, out of the 90 Oilers skaters who've played a preseason game, 90 games played by the skaters in all, there's been 6 games where a guy has had 5 or more hits. And 4 of the games, all 4 of the games he played were Marcus Niemelainen. And 2 other guys forwards did it once each. And with Niemelainen, it's not a bug, it's a feature of his game. And it's basically his core identity as a player, and he seems to be bringing it every single night, and you got to respect that.
Yeah, there's a real consistency to it, isn't there?
He's here to win a job, and he knows that his route to it is shortest distance to the puck and arrive in ill humor, as Fred Shiro used to say.
Yeah.
And lay on the body, and usually every game he gets 5 to 6 hits. And 2 or 3 of them at least are real solid ones.
Yeah. His path to the NHL runs through other NHL players.
And his game is without the puck. He's doesn't do a lot with it. And I mean, last night he had, I looked at his stats. It was so odd. He had 15 different events on the event summary, and 11 of them were without the puck. 5 hits, 5 block shots, and a penalty. The other guys had the puck for all those things. And of the 4 events that he was involved with where he had the puck, 1 was a shot, and the other 3 were giveaways.
Right.
So that's not particularly good, but it really sort of skewed on his value being on the defensive side of things. And maybe it's worth it to have 1 big bopper out of 6. You want that guy in the third pairing, and I think he's there for sure.
Yeah.
Whereas Brober, I think you expect him to gradually work his way up. And the last point I'll make about Brober, because we've so often compared him to Oscar Klefbom. Well, when Oscar Klefbom in year 3, he played most of the season in the AHL, and he played 17 in the NHL. Well, Brober did the same last year with 23 games. In year 4, Klefbom started the season in the press box, and then he got sent down, and he actually played a few games down in Oklahoma City. It would have been at that time. And then was called up, and he wound up playing 60 games that year. But the fact was that he did not establish his spot on the blue line until November. And it didn't it didn't derail his career. Let's put it that way. And if the same thing happens to Brover, I would say don't panic. We've seen this before.
Yeah, you know what? I vividly remember sitting in Rexall Place and watching a very young Jeff Petrie get beat like a rented mule, and thinking to myself, this kid should not be here yet, right? This is not serving a good purpose, and I think that reputation unfairly followed him through the rest of his time in Edmonton. And I thought the mistake wasn't with the player. I thought the mistake was with how the organization handled him at the time. And so, yeah, right. So that's why I'd have no problem with them saying, kid, maybe another 30 days and getting lots of reps down there is just what the doctor ordered.
So anyway, my point being, they have a very reasonable option. And with Niremelainen, they don't have to worry about, they got to waive him so that Broberg's salary, they don't have to waive him. They can just
he's exempt,
send him
right?
down there. Even though he's on his second contract, he's that rare case where he just hasn't had enough games played yet where he has to clear waivers. And so he's safe to send down, but they have a very real option to exchange them on day 2 or day 6 or day 50, at that. So that's
yeah, and I'm comfortable with Ryan Murray in that 7 slot. So that's the insurance policy that you have in place with those two young guys. So
he played one of his games at right defense and looked pretty solid doing so. So you really want that in your number 7 guy. At least I do.
I was going to say that's another example. Yeah, another example of the coaching staff saying, if we never need this, we'd like to see it now, right?
Right.
So I agree.
I mean, Chris Russell, he used at the end, earlier he was in the top 4 or certainly in the top 6. At the end, when he was kind of a 6-7, that was still his sort of superpower. Was they could put him in at left or they could put him in at right, and he was uber experienced at both.
Yep. And again, with a 21, 22-man roster, it's pretty much essential that extra defenseman can play both sides.
Or you have someone else who can, but it's sure a lot easier. It's like having that utility infielder. If you can come in and play any of the infield positions, so you don't have to move your second baseman to shortstop because the utility guy isn't good enough, and now your shortstop isn't good enough either. And it kind of ripples through your lineup. But that's the kind of guy you want, is who can the guy who's really comfortable at playing whatever position, at least handling the defensive side of it without big issue.
Showing my Expos colors here. It's a Mike Lansing. If you remember little Mike, he was a pretty good little ball player, could play third, second, short. You could plug him in wherever and he would play. So
right on. Yeah. So that's the battle at 3 left defense. We already talked a little bit about the Holloway situation. We've got battles at 3 and 4C, and I think 3C is kind of resolved. It looks like McLeod and Nuge are going to play on the same line, and the question is which one's going to play center. I keep seeing them listed by various reporters, and one will have one of the guys playing center, one of the Ryans, and the other one will have them the other way around. But the truth is they can both play center and they can both play left wing. But then that puts your top 4 centers in your top 9. So who then plays 4C?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it was interesting to see Holloway get a couple shifts at center last night. I have to think it would be between Shore, Ryan, and Malone. One of those 3 guys is going to get that job. And if you simply go by the guy who is probably the most versatile, I think it's Derek Ryan.
Yeah.
And I have not minded his game in preseason. He looks like a professional out there. Although I thought Devin Shore showed well last night as well. And I think maybe Shore and Ryan have nosed ahead of Malone. I like what Malone brings. I have lots of time for him. But it feels like Shore and Ryan might have the inside track on that 4 center position. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, Shore's biggest downfall might be is that he earns the princely sum of $850,000, $100,000 over the minimum. whereas Malone is at 762.5, which is actually this year's minimum plus next year's minimum, which goes up 25,000 averaged out. So he's not quite 100,000 less than Shore, but better part of that.
Yeah.
And the one roster that I saw bandied about by Hart Levine of puckpedia.com.
Mm-hmm. Hart's a smart
name
guy.
a couple times last time, and I forgot to mention puckpedia.com.
Yeah.
Hart of Puckpedia, he predicted in advance that Ryan McLeod would get a $798,000 offer. Not 800,000, 798, and that was predicated on his vision of a 21-man roster that did include Holloway and Brober on the season opening roster, and then really cutting corners wherever you could, and having only one of Ryan or Janmark on the team, and having one of Malone or McKegg on the team when McKegg is gone already, and there was so little dollars to play with that even 850 might price him out of the roster. I mean, that's a sad state of affairs. But the way that the salary cap has become polarized, with a few guys making sort of all of the extra dollars and all the other guys clustered around the minimum, that could be the difference maker. Shore's game I've liked fine, and I've grown to like Devon Shore, and I think he's I learned to like him the most during the playoffs last year when he didn't play a game. And it's not because I didn't hate his game. I loved his team spirit and the way he was supporting the team, even though he was, one of the black aces as it turned out. And I think he's one of those guys. He can help a little bit at center or left wing at the bottom of your roster, or he could help at press box, which is a useful position. Your 13th forward or whatever. But he's in tough because unless something else breaks, it kind of solves the salary cap and gives him a little bit of breathing room. Then it's that could be the thing for him. And the other guy who's back in the equation, we heard, is Tyler Benson at 750,000. If he could make the team instead of Brad Malone or McKegg, and they still got a ton of centers that can fill off, right? Like you say, Derek Ryan, he could play 4C. What I would say he can't do is play 3C, and he proved it last year at the beginning of the year.
Yep.
And he looked best at right wing at 33 or 4 right wing. I think he could handle 4C, at least fill in there. But they do have options. I mean, Holloway is the other option. So.
Yeah, and I agree. And Benson's had a good camp and comes at the right dollar. With Holloway's emergence, I wonder if that makes a trade more likely. It's pretty tough to move on from someone who you know what you're getting. For instance, a guy like Warren Foegele. I like Warren Foegele. I got lots of time for Warren Foegele, but let's just use him as an example. Love him or hate him, you know what you're getting with Warren Foegele for the most part, the game in and game out. Well, if all of a sudden Holloway looks like an everyday NHL player, does that make it easier for Ken Holland to move on from one of those guys that's got the bigger salary? And then that kind of solves the checker game that he's having to play with the bottom of his lineup vis-a-vis the salary cap.
Yeah, that's for sure. If you were to move out, Warren Foegele is probably the best example, just because there's so many options at left wing that you could replace him with. I mean, they got him playing at right wing because in a sense, you could say they don't need him at left wing, so they can afford to move him to right wing because they got so many other left wingers. That's one way to parse it. But you could replace Warren Foegele with Matthias Janmark, who I personally have liked fine. I thought he's looked pretty good in these games. He hasn't scored any points, but I like his game. I like his smarts along the boards. He wins battles and anticipates and gets the puck moving in good ways. I mean, hasn't really produced any offense. And I know he's, a 25-point guy, but on the bottom six, that ain't so bad. Warren Fogel's a 25-point guy, right?
Yeah.
So,
well,
but for 1.5 million less, that solves a couple of headaches for for Ken Holland.
Yeah, well, if your top 9 wingers are, here's another way of looking at it. If your top 9 wingers are Kane, Holloway, McLeod on the left side, and Hyman, Yamamoto, and Puljujarvi on the right, I don't mind that either.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's, I mean, Holloway is one of your options at 4C, and if you don't think fourth line minutes is enough for him, well, you have the option of flipping him out with, say, Devon Shore.
Yep.
Or on the other hand, you say you do with him what they did with McLeod last year. You say we're going to play a lot of 4C, but when special teams comes, you're on the second power play and on one of the top 2 penalty kills.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get you lots of minutes that way. And I think he's got the skill set that he can handle that.
It certainly looks that way, doesn't it? And against a close to NHL team in Winnipeg last night, he looked like more than capable of handling that load.
Yeah, some of the young Jets sure looked good last night too, eh? Cole Perfetti and Brad Lambert. Oh,
yep.
Lambert,
yeah, I'm cheering for Brad Lambert. I've got an old family connection there, and it's nice
right.
to see him doing well. So
I can't remember who it was he dangled coming in on the one-on-one in overtime. Stuart Skinner saved. Things are happening so fast in overtime, and I didn't have it on. I was just watching the live stream that I couldn't remember it all for the commentary. But Lambert just absolutely bamboozled some Oilers defenseman on the one.
He has great hands and good skill. How's this for a small world? Brad's dad was my brother's best man.
Oh.
So it's 6 degrees of separation.
No, Lane Lambert's not his dad.
No, Ross is.
Ross
is Lane's older brother.
Right, Lane's his uncle. Right.
Yeah, Ross is now these days. Ross is known as a player agent, but Ross was a very good junior player in his day as well. So.
Yeah, well, he looked good last night. Brad Lambert. He looked better and better as the game went on, at least until Jesse Puljujarvi showed him who was boss. Another part of overtime with absolutely great crunching check and takeaway of the puck.
It was. I've been critical of Jesse in the preseason, and I think fairly so, but I felt that he looked like he was fine in his game last night. I felt that was way closer to the Jesse that we and probably he wants to see.
Yeah, he got stoned by a Hellebuck at least twice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyway. We got other battles, but we talked about 4C. So right wing, I mean, you're proposing moving Hyman over and then going with the Yamamoto Puljujarvi, and then for right wing, I mean, that's where Derek Ryan goes in one theory.
Yeah. I mean, the only other guy who I think could possibly take that slot is Jake Virtanen, and I don't think we've seen him take it in preseason. I was going to make a point on Virtanen. I know there's lots of people out there today who would have hoped that Virtanen would have gone out with today's cuts, and hey, I respect everybody's opinion. I have a theory on that though.
Yeah.
As an organization, if you just bring in a PTO, play him in a couple of games, and then toss him in the garbage, I think it makes it difficult in future years to attract really good players to come in on PTOs. Whereas if you have a reputation of when you bring a guy in, you give him every chance to make the team. And if he doesn't ultimately make it, fine. But I think it speaks volumes to future players and to agents out there that in Edmonton, you get a fair shot.
Right.
Whether you make it or not is another thing, but you get a fair shot. And I somehow imagine that Jake Virtanen still being in camp is probably even more about that than his performance, given that his performance has been underwhelming to this point.
Yeah, well, it's been all of that. And the organization took a lot of heat for signing this guy for, other reasons that sort of compiled. This kind of was another log on a fire in one sense. But the guys here, give him a fair shot. Absolutely. I think you're spot on that. And I think one of Ken Holland's real strengths is that he treats his players fairly.
Yep.
When he signs guys in the summer, they get a shot in the fall. And when and I bet you the agents love the guy. I really do. because he lives up to what he says he's going to do with their guys.
And when it comes to recruitment, that's important, right?
Yeah, and for PTOs, I mean, the Oilers, I mean, it actually is, to me, a little bit of a statement of weakness that they've had so many successful PTOs in past years. They've brought in some decent players into camp, but most years it seems like that guy goes right on ahead and wins the job.
Yeah.
And I mean, last year it was Colton Sevier, and year before it was Devon Shore, and the year before that it was Alex Chason. Was that the year Jason Garrison got some games? Or anyway,
Oh, wow, yeah, forgot about him.
There's a few PTOs over the years. So if Virtanen comes in and they give him that look and they say, "Nope, sorry, you didn't make the cut. We're going in a different direction." They can't say he didn't get a fair chance. They can just say he didn't pass the test.
Yep, exactly.
And I'd say to this point, he's not passing the test, but the test is not over yet.
I agree on both fronts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think that's. That, I had a feeling that was going to be. You said you had a point on Virtanen, and I had an idea.
Yeah, the bigger picture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, anyway, it's an interesting hill to die on in the one sense, but if you're going to give the guy a shot, give him a shot. But I don't expect him to win the job because, frankly, he hasn't been anywhere near the top 4 right wingers that I've seen in any of these games.
I agree.
So
he has been
flashes, and that's it.
Yeah, it was a good forecheck the other night, which created the chance for Benson on the goal. Yep. But I mean, I could count his highlights on one hand, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that's about all I can come up with. And some of those other highlights would have been, a good stick in the neutral zone, like nothing that's going to make, the highlights on the Supper Time Sports cast. So,
well, they've already given him 4 of the first 5 games, and I mean the PTOs they're getting their shot.
Yeah, surely each of them will get one more because otherwise they wouldn't have kept them today, right?
And they're short of right-handed sticks. Let's face it, on both the defense and up front. That if they're going to be playing all these exhibition games, that they're going to want. That's one of the reasons I could kind of promise these guys that we're going to get some time. And when Vincent Desharnais, for instance, got hurt, or when Raphael Lavoie and Ty Tullio got banged up before camp even started, it was good that they had sort of extra bodies
100%
for those games. But I think he'll get one more game. But for Virtanen, the idea was that he was going to come in and be some kind of a power forward. And I mean, for a player type, he was clearly the guy most likely to replace Zach Cassian if they decided to go that way. Well, I'm not seeing that player either. I mean, last 3 games, 0 hits, 0 hits. 3 games in a row. If you're trying to make the team, how is that possible?
No, I agree. But I think by far and away the best of the 2 PTOs has been Demers, who I thought was pretty good again last night after having a bit of an off night his previous outing. So
that was a disaster.
Yeah,
Calgary. But last night he responded nicely, and I thought he made one mistake where he saw his teammates getting burned in the corner, and he made a step over to try and help him out, and he left his man in front, and his man wound up putting the puck in the net. But that was an error of commission.
Yep.
He was trying to do someone else's job, and of course, anyway, he made up for it minutes later by scoring the tying goal after that goal that he'd been beaten on had untied it, and. You see his veteran smarts, other than the Calgary game where he just didn't have it. He was handling the puck poorly until the third period, and he had a rough night all the way around. But the other 2 games and last night was mostly good, and some of it was very good.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having him as an organizational depth player if he would go for a 2-way contract.
Yeah.
It's I can and from what I understand of the guy, he's a real stand-up guy, good in the room. You wouldn't mind that guy being down in Bakersfield with your prospects, right? So it'll be interesting to see if something comes of that or not.
Yeah, we'll have a righty to mentor Kesselring and Kemp and Desharnais. I mean, I'm not sure there's quite enough room for all of those guys on a gamely basis, but. As a sort of organizational number 9, number 10, where you
Yeah.
can call him up, when you put him in there, he's not going to be terrified because he's deer in the headlights because he's never been in those lights before. He's been plenty of
Yeah.
times.
And because he's
Got a number
right-handed,
of
if a
games.
CC or a Barry happens to get hurt, that's not a bad guy to
Right.
have a phone call away, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I know, I'm with you. And, the two ways the way to go. I don't see him making the top 6 or 7 of this team out of camp,
no,
but I
agreed.
do see him if he was in the organization, getting some games. Uh, because injuries happen and they especially happen on defense.
Yeah. And what's
So
the old thing? If you're going to win a Stanley Cup, you probably need, 8, 9, 10 defensemen.
yeah, oh yeah.
So it'd be okay if there's one guy that has 500, 600 NHL games under his belt, that wouldn't suck.
Yeah, well, last year there was a place, 2 years ago, they only used 10D all year. When I say only, it's still 10 guys.
Mm-hmm.
Last year there was a span when the COVID and the injuries hit where the Oilers used 11 different defensemen in a 7-game span.
I remember that.
And there's a whole bunch of guys wearing number 84 and stuff, right? And it was, and they lost 6 games in a row at that particular time. But that's where, they had basically all kids they were calling up from the minors and maybe having one more vet because I think, Russell was himself hurt
He was.
in that
Yes.
span.
Yeah.
And Keith was hurt and Nurse was hurt, and Cece got the COVID and it was just craziness.
Mm-hmm.
It was, anyway, that's where you do want to have 10 because you're probably going to use 10 most years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not against it because especially those 3, we didn't get the chance to see Desharnais,
No.
which is really unfortunate. Kessling and Kemp, I like them. I think they're improving. I'm still not sure they're ready to get NHL games this year. Certainly not any big stretch of them. Maybe,
Yeah.
a short time here or there. So having a righty as an option, and of course you have to monitor his play too. Is he, has he lost it or is he still
No,
got
for sure.
But you can monitor him pretty close if he's on your AHL team with an AHL contract.
Absolutely. And
Or an
Desharnais,
NHL two-way contract.
yeah, and with Desharnais, he's going to be out a month recovering, and then if you assume it'll take at least a month for him to get back up to speed again. I think that's just fair, right?
Yeah.
You might not see the real player until Christmas.
Yeah, yeah, that's a total drag for him. That he
I
just
feel
made
awful
that
for
big
him.
breakthrough.
Yeah,
and then this happens. All right. Well, we've still got 3 games to go this week: Monday, Wednesday, Friday. 2 home games. I'm expecting to see the big guys play the 2 home games, and a couple of them are going to have to play in the road game just because they no longer have 36 different players that played last night and the night before. Well, now they're down to 30, so there's not quite that flex.
yeah,
But most players will get 2 out of the next 3, I would suggest, with 30 guys left and 20 in the lineup.
Yeah, and from your top 6 and your top 4, those guys are probably wanting 2 of the next 3 games just to get themselves tuned up, right? So it's, I think it's probably fair to say the game in Abbotsford is probably going to be the lighter lineup of the 3. So,
100%. That's one of those business trip things that that the older guys, if they had the option, that the game means less to them than it does to anyone else. So it makes sense to do it the way that they do. I actually utterly defend that. And the price you pay is that as a home team, you often get a weak visitor, so you don't get a full test there either. So really, this week, probably the last 2 games, we'll see something closer to a dress rehearsal.
Agreed. Yeah.
So, anything else that we want to cover, Kurt, that we haven't at least touched on?
No, I think we've covered a lot of real estate here. It feels like I'm kind of looking up and down the healthy lineup here, and I think we've for at least a few seconds we've talked about everybody except Brett Kulak. So
McDavid.
Yeah. So
that guy.
It's funny how you can go whole whole segments and not talk about the best player on the team.
Well, he's only played the one game, and I mean this whole thing is about what are they doing around the edges of the roster. And one thing Connor McDavid isn't is anywhere near the edges of the roster.
and the big highlight from the last game was him surviving the hit from Evander Kane. So I don't know about you, my heart sure skipped a couple beats.
Well, it looked like Kane saw him at the last second. He brought his arm up and basically elbowed him in the head.
Yeah,
I was just terrified that he was just going to go down and stay down.
Me too. And at that point, you don't have much of a chance, right? And
it's just an
instinctive
instinctive reaction. It's not like he tried to take his head off. I mean, if it was an opponent, you would say, "Boy, that was a dirty elbow." But that's talking. It's just a sudden brace yourself for unexpected contact, and it was that.
And as solid as Connor McDavid is, Evander Kane is one put together hockey player.
Yeah. Well, we'll be seeing more of those guys in the days to come, and certainly in the weeks that follow this one. Once the games start counting for real, they'll be front and center, and we'll be plenty of time to talk about Connor McDavid and Evander Kane and Leon Draisaitl and Darnell and the boys, right? So,
yeah, looking forward to it. Probably by late Friday night, we'll probably have a pretty good idea who the 21-22 men will be. So,
yeah. I think they have to declare on the 10th, and the first game is on the 12th. So,
but often after that last exhibition game, while they're doing the post game show, you often hear, so and so just got farmed out to the AHL team.
He's playing tomorrow for Bakersfield.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, thank you once again, Kurt, for pinch hitting, and we'll be back to our regular listeners. We'll be back more to our regular schedule in the days and certainly weeks ahead when we get into the every game, post game cast, mostly with David and myself, with Kurt waiting in the wings as a ready, willing, and able pinch hitter from time to time. And once in a long while, we'll treat you with a three-headed podcast. But
I'm usually better suited as the Rusty Staub of the threesome and can come in and give you a decent pinch hit. But it's always fun when the three of us can get together too.
Yeah, well, you're more our DH than our PH, I guess, when it comes to that. But
okay, I'll take that.
That's meant as a compliment, Kurt. So anyway, thanks again for doing it this time.
You bet, it was fun.
Thanks to you, the audience, for listening. And in the meantime, and in between times, it's been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.